All right. So today is the introduction to 3500. This is just a overview, and we do have uh, both online and in-person training sessions for 3500 uh, available through our training, which, by the way, is now being offered remotely. So here at bentleytraining.com/remote learning, we are now offering the 3500 operation and maintenance, fundamentals of vibration, machinery diagnostics, and recip compressor condition monitoring and diagnostic classes as an online course. So if you wish to enroll in the more in-depth class, that is available. So starting off, we're going to kind of cover the history of the Bentley Nevada monitoring system. Way back when, actually just over 60 years ago, Don Bentley founded Bentley Nevada with the technology of using proximity probes to get a linear displacement measurement that can also be converted to a vibration reading. Coming out first with the 5000 series, then the 1700 series, then the 9000 series, then the 7200 series, and then the 3300 series. 3300 series, still see quite a number of those out in the field. Very robust, very reliable units. So people have a hard time giving them up, but they have gone fully obsolete. We just can't get the components to build or repair the circuits anymore. So be aware, if you have one of these, you cannot get replacement parts very easily. So may want to consider upgrading those sometime in the future. Then in 1995, we released the 3500 series. Over the years, we have sold over 85,000 racks. I believe that is closer to 90,000 now. And over that time period, we haven't just been stagnant and just been a unmoving item. The cards have been redesigned multiple times. When they first came out, it was just the 3500 card. When we added some greater System 1 capability, we came out with the M series. Then later we came out with the M squared series. And then here just recently, and starting in 2017, we were doing the RoHS refresh, basically removing the cadmium and lead and things like that from the system to make it compliant with the European specifications. So all of these have been very recently refreshed. They are all forwards and backwards compatible. So if you have an old rack and put a new card in it, it still works. If you have an old card that's sitting on a shelf and you put it in a new rack, it will still work. So it generally all looks the same, so it doesn't appear that we've made much change, but all of it has been redesigned and enhanced over the years. We are coming out with the Orbit 60. That is going to be hitting the streets next year. This is a parallel product, so it is going to have features and functions that we don't have in 3500, and the 3500 is going to be an ongoing product for the foreseeable future. So no need to worry about it being obsoleted anytime soon. They have given us guarantees of at least another 10 years of full support, so no worries. We will be having a session on Orbit 60, so you can attend that to learn more about the Orbit 60. For the 3500, there are 3 basic mounting options. There is a rack and panel mount. The rack mount has 4 little divots with screw holes through the front bezel to mount it in a regular cabinet. The panel mount, you can see the little notch here on the side. There's a little triangular piece with a tensioner that allows you to slide the rack in from the front. The bezel faces up to the panel, and then the brackets put on the back and tension to hold it into that panel. The third option is the bulkhead mount, where it mounts flush and the back plane is mirrored up so that you can have your I/O on the top and your monitors on the bottom. And that way, if you have a limited space where you can mount it, you can, or you do not have access to the back side, you can use this so that everything's on one side, and some places it's just more convenient. We also offer a mini rack. It's just a smaller version. If you have need for fewer channels and don't have as much space, this is an option for you. All of the 3500 modules are hot swappable. So all of the front modules can be pulled out and inserted while the system is powered up and live. We do recommend that you lift the trips, use the rack inhibit, and just to make sure that nothing changes states and you don't accidentally shut a machine down. Ideally, the machine will be down and you do rack maintenance at that time, but sometimes you just gotta make repairs on the fly. So temporarily lifting the trips and engaging the rack inhibit are good ways to reduce the chances of a unnecessary trip. The I/O modules, you do have to remove the front monitor first before you unplug the I/O. Removing the monitor powers down the I/O slot. So the power comes into the monitor and then goes back through the monitor to the I/O. So pulling the front card powers the sensors and everything down and makes it safe to remove the I/O card. I'm basically just going to work left to right on the front side. Your power supplies are the first slot on the left-hand side if you're looking from the front, or on the right-hand side if you're looking from the back. Does require 1 per rack as a minimum. The primary and secondary can have different power input sources. So you can have one that is grid power and with AC, and one that is on, say, a battery backup power system for protection. It comes basically in 3 flavors nowadays, a universal AC power supply and a high and low DC options. In times past, we did offer a high and low AC option. Those have been condensed to the universal just to make it easier for spare parts and ordering. Either power supply can power the entire rack. The lower slot is primary when 2 are installed. And both the front and the rear modules are half height, so you only need to buy what you actually need to use. It actually uses 2 separate power buses for the 2 separate power supplies. So if there is a failure of a power supply, the switchover is already existing, so it's not even a blink in the system. Moving over one more slot to the right is the 3522, also known as the TDI Transient Data Interface. This is basically the brain of the operation. This is where you do all of your configuration. This is what stores the event list for both alarm and system events. So if there's a card failure, a power supply failure, anything of that list, that is listed in that system event list. These are removable when the system is online. You will, however, lose your event lists. The rack will continue to function without it. But if you need to do any configuration or you need connection to system 1, it's got to be in there. Oops. So these do have 4 contacts on the back. There is a rack reset for basically remotely locating the reset button on the front. There is an alarm inhibit, which is used to basically inhibit any alarm from happening while that contact is shorted. Keeps your relays from changing state. Still suggest you lift the trips just to be sure. Trip multiply, which is a function to multiply an alarm or trip value during a certain short-term condition. So for starting up something like a slurry pump, something like that, where it's going to be a fairly rough startup and then it smooths out and then runs normally, you can use this trip multiply in junction with the start button to, say, run a timer relay that will basically short that trip multiply contact for 30 seconds or whatever the time is till that unit gets up to a satisfactory operating level, and then it will open and go back to the standard. So if you have an alarm of, say, 3 and you have a trip multiply of 2, when that trip multiply is shorted, it will give you an alarm value of 6. So trip multiply of 2, alarm value of 3. And we also have the OK relay. This is a separate relay, and it is basically to say that everything is okay with the rack or not. So if a probe goes not okay, the OK relay will change state. If a card is unconfigured, it will be not okay. Basically, anything that is not okay with the rack will cause that OK relay to change state. This is just a nice way of indicating whether or not everything is going okay with the rack. You can tie it to a flashing light over the rack or into the DCS system. You do have a key switch that has a run or a program mode, and depending on how you set up the configuration in the rack, controls some of what happens when you are in run or program mode, whether or not you can download when it's in run mode or not. It is a security feature. There are 2 different generations of the 22 card. There's the one that has the 9-pin serial port and the one that now has the USB port. The USB is the most current one. We basically just took and moved the USB to serial converter inside of the card. You do need a driver to be able to use that port. It is available on the tech support website under the 3500 rack config download area. The TDI also has a internal buffer that holds startup and shutdown data. So depending on how it's set up, whether it's System 1 or the TDI Offline configuration, you set up a speed range that would be a transient. So for, say, a steam turbine, it would be 100 RPMs to 3560. So if it sees a speed in that range, it will trigger a startup or shutdown data collection. And as the speed increases or decreases, it stores on a delta RPM at a max of 10 samples per second, or on delta time. So if you're talking about something like a steam turbine where you're doing a startup and you run it up to somewhere just below the first critical, and then you let it do a heat soak to let everything thermally expand and get into its operating state, it would take data on a delta RPM from that 100 RPMs up to the speed below critical. And then as you're in that heat soak, it just samples at delta time. And then as you start ramping up again, it will collect on the delta RPM. And for every 10 samples of static data, you get one waveform. It also has an alarm buffer. So it stores about 10 minutes of 1 second static data. And when you hit that alarm set point, it will dump this buffer back to System 1. And that gives you, for everything associated with the same Keyphasor. So if you have an entire machine train on there, it doesn't just give you that high resolution data for the point that went into an alarm, it gives it to you for everything associated with the same Keyphasor or collection group. And here you can see you get 1 second static data for about 10 minutes before the event happened. About 20 seconds before the event, it switches to 100 millisecond static data and continues for about 10 seconds after. And then it switches to a 1 second static data again. And you get approximately one waveform for every 10 static samples. A feature that a lot of people don't know about with the 3500 is the TDI Offline. This is built into all of the TDIs that have firmware greater than 1.6. And this allows you to basically set those parameters for the startup and shutdown speed in the 3500 TDI, and it will store data in the card. This is if you are not connected to a System 1. You can't have TDI Offline configured and be connected to System 1. It's an either or. So this basically just gives you a kind of a flight recorder functionality. So if you do have a trip or an alarm, you can go out and download a file from the rack and run it through a little converter, and it will convert it into a System 1 archive, which can be viewed with the System 1 display, which does not require any licensing. So handy feature that you just have to go in and set up. We do have guides on how to set that up. So if that is something that you're interested in, contact any of your Bentley contacts and we can get you that information. Next, we're going to go over some of the most common input cards, the 40, 42, and 45. The 40 is known as the proximity card. The 42 is the prox seismic card, and the 45 is generally known as the position card. Something to be noted, the 40 does not have 420 milliamp outputs and doesn't have all of the available channel types that the 42 does. The 42 does have the 420 milliamp outputs and more advanced channel types. The 42M also has thrust and differential expansion that are also available in the 45. So there is some kind of overlap there. There are previous versions, the 40 and 42, that do not have the M or the M squared. Those do not supply waveform data back to System 1 or to the TDI for the TDI Offline. The first generation of those cards did not have an M and did not have the waveform capability. So the 40M, it is a 4-channel module, generally used for vibration, does radial vibration, thrust position, differential expansion, and eccentricity. It does have the 4 buffered outputs, which are basically straight through feeds of the signal buffered, so that if there is any splash, shorts, anything like that, you won't short the system out because of these buffered connectors. These are used for connecting, say, an odd array system, a portable data collector, or for just verifying a signal. So if you walk up with a fluke meter, you can very quickly connect on the buffered output, read the gap, read the AC peak to peak, and even the frequency. It does come in internal and external termination options. We do offer internal barrier I/O cards if needed, and it does come with SIL 1, SIL 2 rating available. It is something that has to be noted when you're placing the order, because the cards do come off the line and go through extra testing to meet the SIL 1, SIL 2. So if you have an existing card that was not ordered with the SIL rating, it cannot be SIL rated after it leaves the factory. And we have various agency approval options. The 42, again, a 4-channel. It does many more things than the 40. This is probably the most commonly used card for vibration, just because it does so much more, and having one card that does it all instead of having possibly 2 cards, it just cuts down on your spare parts and makes it easier to manage. So in addition to everything that the 40 does, it offers acceleration, velocity, shaft absolute, circular acceptance regions, which means it is capable of taking in accelerometers and velometers and seismoprobes, unlike the 40 card, which will only take in the proximity. And again, it does have the capability of doing the 420 milliamp. You can choose one of the proportional values available per channel to output as the 420, whether it's the direct or the gap or the 1x amplitude or the 1x phase. You basically get one of those variables to output as the 420 milliamp. The 42 does offer some extra options so that you can have your signal in direct, RMS, peak, or bandpass vibration for velocity and acceleration. It also comes with either internal or external termination options. We'll discuss those more here just in a moment. It also has barrier IO cards available, and the SIL 1, SIL 2 rating, again, has to be placed at the time of order so that it can go through its appropriate testing. And again, different agency approval options are available if needed. Next is the 45 monitor. This is the position monitor. It will take in sensors of the proximity type, rotary position, DC and AC LVDTs, and rotary potentiometers. Always have a hard time saying that word. So LVDT is a linear variable displacement transducer. In case you didn't know, I personally hate acronyms without being defined. So the 45 will cover thrust position, differential expansion, single ramp, non-standard single ramp, dual ramp differential expansion, complementary differential expansion, case expansion, and valve position. Does have all of our buffered outputs. It does have the internal and external termination available. Approvals are also available, and it does offer the 4 to 20 milliamp for each channel. Through 3500 rack config, you can access the verification feature. This allows you to view the values for a single channel. So on a displacement probe, you may have the direct value, the gap, the 1x amplitude, the 1x phase, 2x amplitude, 2x phase. Being able to see what those values are directly in the rack can help in troubleshooting communication issues and that sort of thing. We also use this when we are doing a rack verification. We do recommend that you do a rack verification once a year or as available, being most everybody wants to keep their machinery up and running and they don't take an outage every year. We understand and recommend once a year as the optimal, but do it as you can. In each of the operation and maintenance manuals, there are sections on how to do verification of each channel type. And there's diagrams showing you how to set everything up to inject the signals. And generally, our service group will inject a bottom scale, mid scale, full scale, confirm that the system reads correctly, and also inject a alert and danger so that you can confirm the relay operations as needed. We also inject a speed signal at the same time to get your 1x amplitude, 1x phase at the same time. And if you wish to, get out of this for just a second, and to access those manuals, it is just bntechsupport.com. And if you do not already have an SSO from BNTech Support, you can register for one here. It generally takes about 24 hours to get that. And if you have an active maintenance and support agreement with us, if you put that maintenance support agreement number in, it increases the number of things that you have access to. So I'm going to log in with mine. Agree that I'm not going to sell everything out. And right here is the product manuals under the download center. And it's nicely organized by type. And you can very quickly jump to and download the manuals from there. So we'll hop back into the presentation. The internal and external terminations I spoke of earlier. The internal terminations is basically the little green Euro connectors on the back of the rack that allow you to land your field wiring directly to the back of the monitor. External termination with terminal blocks is something that's very handy when you are doing something like a off-site manufactured cabinet. That way the 3500 can be put into the cabinet, the external termination blocks mounted over on the side, and then when it gets to site, you run the field wiring in from the top or the bottom and land it to the terminal strips over here. It makes for a very nice and clean looking cabinet. Next, we're going to talk about the relay modules. There are basically two types of relay modules, the 32 and the 33. The 32M is just the newer version of the 32. If you have a 32, it is a 4-channel relay module. It is limited to 60 logical steps. We found that people were trying to do more complex logic, and therefore we came out with the 32M, which expanded that out to 300 logic steps approximately. As you build the logic, it uses up a percentage of the available processing in the module, and it goes from 100% down to 0. When you hit 0, you can no longer add any more logic steps. The 16 channel already had the increased logic memory. So dependent upon whether you need four relays or 16 relays, can kind of determine which one you want to buy. You can have more than one card in a single rack, and you can use them in redundancy modes where you can have the same logic in 2 different cards to act as a redundancy. The relays are single pole double throw in both the 32 and the 33. All of the cards go through ongoing self-testing, so they're continuously checking their circuitry to make sure that everything is performing properly. They are fully software programmable relay logic. It does use and or voting, and there is also an option for true and. So the difference between and true and is if you have 2 variables being voted as and, using normal and logic, if the first variable goes not okay or is disabled, the relay will still act upon that singular item and close the relay. If it is true and, it requires both items to be in alarm before it will activate the relay. So that is a choice that you can make and set up depending on what your requirements are. The 3500 does differentiate between faults and user-induced activities. There are dip switches to set whether it is a normally energized or normally de-energized. In a standard configuration, a pulled card would not cause the relays to fire. So if you remove the front module, it does not cause the relays to change state. There is a fail-safe option for the I/O, so that if you do pull that front card or that front card fails, it does change the state of all the relays. Again, they are available in SIL 1 and SIL 2. Has to be ordered at the time that the card is ordered. And we do offer various approvals as needed. Next, we're going to talk about the 25 and 50. These are the Keyphasor and Tachometer modules. The Keyphasor is a half height module, and you can have 2 of those half height cards in a singular or in a rack, giving you a total of 4 Keyphasor signals. That is a limit of the backplane because the Keyphasor signal has to be fed to each card so that it can access that signal for the 1x and 2x amplitude and phase calculations. We can take in both proximity probes and magnetic pickups. And we do have the buffered outputs on the front. To be a true Keyphasor, it is a once per turn event. We can take signals from a multi-event wheel. That just does not give you an absolute phase. So if the machine stops and restarts, the phase will change for that machine or for that vibration reading. With a singular, the phase will stay consistent from run to run. It is available with SIL. It's just a matter of making sure that you put that requirement in the order to begin with, because it cannot be SIL rated after it leaves the factory. And again, we have various agency approvals as needed. The 50 and 50M. The 50 is just an older version of the 50. The new one is the M module. The M basically added the ability to have the gap as a variable available. Again, it accepts proximity probes and magnetic probes. It is a 2-channel monitor, so where you can get 4 channels of speed in a single slot with the 25, you only get 2 with the 50. It can be configured for speed band alarming, rotor acceleration, 0 speed, and reverse rotation. The reverse rotation is kind of interesting because it looks at which probe triggers first, requires 2 probes to be set up for reverse rotation. So if it's going A to B, it's rotating counterclockwise. If the pulse arrives at B first and then A, it's clockwise rotation. The output from the 50 can be used as a Keyphasor. It is an option in the configuration, but if it is not a once per revolution input, it is not a phase absolute setup. So you will see the phase change as the machine stops and restarts. Next, we're going to talk about the displays, the 94. In previous generations, we had the indicators on the front of the racks, whether it was in the 7200 an analog needle indicating the value, or the 3300, which had the LCD displays. The 3500 for space considerations did not have a display on it. So we offered several variations of display. The 94 is the current one. The 94M is the updated one. And it is available in a face mount, a panel mount, rack mount, or a completely independent mount. Gives you access to the system event list, the alarm event list, all of the variables data, and the state of the relays. You can configure up to 9 custom bar graph display options. So if you want to have a normal running, a startup, or if it's a manufacturing or process environment and you have different products that get run through, you can switch between different product views. So for mounting, the basic connection, the display needs to be within 20 feet of the rack. We offer a 15-inch and a 10-inch option. If you need to mount the display further away from the rack than 20 feet, you can use a KVM extender or keyboard video mouse setup that can extend the range beyond 1,000 feet and get to the display that way. We also offer what we call a router box. This allows you to have up to 4 racks displayed on one display monitor. And then you can display one rack at a time, and by making a selection on the display, you can switch between the different racks. The 94M compatibility with the previous 94, you cannot replace the 94 main module with a 94M module without replacing the I/O module, and you can't replace the I/O on a 94 with a 94M module without replacing the front module. So they do have to be replaced as a pair. The 94M main module and I/O are compatible with the previous display. So if you have a Parker power station display, you can replace just the monitor and I/O and get it back up and running. The KVM, the keyboard video mouse hardware and router box are both compatible with the 94M and the 94. So if you already have KVM or a router box, it's the same hardware. No need to replace that if you need to upgrade to the 94M. The 94M 15-inch display is backwards compatible with the 94 previous model. The 10-inch is not. And the 94M is not compatible with the old 93, which was an LCD screen. So if you have a 93 that fails, you will need to upgrade to the 94M monitor, I/O, and display. So a quick overview of all the cards. We've just covered kind of the main cards in this session, just due to time constraints. So in the 3500 brochure, there's a nice little chart that shows you kind of the features and functions of each of the different card types for inputs. So you have the 25 Keyphasor, the 40 proximity module, the 42 prox seismic, the 44 aeroderivative, the 45 position monitor, so on and so forth, including temperature and process variable inputs, ones that are specific to reciprocating compressors, and ones that are specific to hydro. So there is a list of features and functions here.